When I was a little girl, I didn't like come out of the womb saying, I want to be an insurance agent. I was not technically that wasn't my goal, is to be in insurance or to even be a business owner. I actually grew up in a pastor's home who grew up in a pastor's home. In fact, there's 5 generations of pastors in our line. So that was in my blood, or so I thought. But I went to school to be a pastor, and I quickly realized after graduating that this was not just going to happen for me like I thought it was. I didn't have a job lined up, so I moved back to Northwest Indiana, where I'm from, and I had a lot of student loans that I had to pay off. So I was like, I need a job, and nothing is opening up in the church, so I'm going to just get a job at the local insurance agency down the road. And I became a receptionist. And even though that wasn't my career of choice, my dad had always taught me to do everything with excellence. And so I tried to do that. I got all the licenses that I needed. I sunk my teeth into that job. I helped the agent grow her business. I quickly realized I really loved to sell. I loved helping people place products that they needed for their life. And so I found out that I loved the industry, but I did not love the company that I was working for. So in the meantime, I was falling madly in love with this guy who was a youth pastor in Indianapolis, Indiana. And I called him one day. We had been dating for about a year. And I said, hey, Dustin, what would you think about me trying to find a job in Indianapolis? And I think he didn't realize at the time how determined I could actually be. And I got off the phone with him. He was like, sure, go ahead, do your thing. Within an hour, I had 3 job interviews lined up at State Farm agencies in Indianapolis. I was so determined and very much so in love. So I was like, okay, this is happening. A month later, I moved to Indianapolis. I had a job at Rick Smith's State Farm agency. And there I worked for him for 4 years. And Rick was a godsend to me because he kind of let me do my thing. He let me hire interns and teach them how to sell and run a business. He helped me put systems and processes in place. I think he loved it because he could sit back and let me kind of run the agency, but I loved it because little did I know I was learning how to run a business. And so I was kind of I wasn't freaking out at this time that my plan to be in the ministry wasn't happening, because it was very likely that I was going to marry a pastor. So I knew, you know what, as long as I'm married to a pastor, I'll be okay, because being a pastor's wife is basically the same thing as being a pastor. Just ask my mom, without the paycheck though. So I was working, and it was all working out. I was working for him. I had my 9 to 5, and after 9 to 5, I didn't think about the job, and I would get to go do ministry with my husband on the nights and weekends. And it was just, oh yeah, by the way, we got married in that 4 years. Didn't have any kids at this point, but we were just rocking and rolling. We were having so much fun. I loved it. I felt like, man, God, this is your plan for my life. This is what we're doing. I'm collecting this paycheck from this job that I can kind of turn off at the end of the day, and then really get to do ministry with my husband at the end of the day. And so it was really working out, and I felt like this is what my life was going to look like. But like I said, I loved what I did at State Farm. So State Farm leadership approached me, and they were like, hey, why don't you open your own agency? And I immediately was like, no, that's not what God has for me. And I said I would think about it, and I did think about it. I went home and I thought about it for about an hour, and I was like, that's not what I'm supposed to do. So I told my husband, I was like, I don't think I'm gonna do this. And I told my boss, hey, I'm with you long term. This is what you have me long term. And I told the leadership, no, I'm not gonna pursue that at this time. And then about 3 weeks later, I was going home to visit my parents, and they live about 2 hours from here. So I was just driving, and I put some music on, and I was just praying, and I was really just asking God to come speak to me. I didn't really have anything specific I wanted him to speak to me about, but just spending time with God. And in that moment, the presence of the Lord just was so tangible. I still can go back on hard days. I go back to that time when I was in the car and God just spoke to me so clearly, Brittany, I want you to start your State Farm agency. And I immediately just started sobbing because I was like, I had all these reasons why I shouldn't do this. I went to school to be in the ministry. I don't know the first thing about running a business. I flunked out of math in high school. In fact, my tutor in high school said to my parents, I cannot work with this girl anymore. She is just not getting it. And insurance and financial services is what I do. So I was like, God, this is just not for me. I'm supposed to work at a church. And then he said, Brittany, I want you to own your own State Farm agency with me. And in that moment, the peace of God was just so real. And then he started to reveal to me that what I had been doing over the last 4 years was ministry. He brought up times where I would meet with customers and I got to pray with them in their heartache after losing a spouse. Or I got to show up to somebody's house after having a fire and hand them a check. And I got to sit with people who had just had a baby and I got to help them plan for their baby's future. All of that was ministry. And what I didn't realize is my definition of ministry was so different than God's definition of ministry.